Welcome to a Business Life series brought to you by Hub Yuno. The inspiration for this series is best summed up by two of our favourite quotes. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest by Benjamin Franklin, and Warren Buffett's the best investment you can make is in yourself. The more you learn, the more you earn. In a Business Life series, we get business leaders from all sectors and walks of life to tell their stories. The hope is that you can learn from their success and failures and apply it to your own business journey. In this interview, I'll be chatting with Chris J. Born with cerebral palsy and a wheelchair user for over 20 years, he is Managing Director of Bascule Disability Training and Director of Great Ballard School. Before we get started, let me just quickly tell you about what we do. Do you want to grow your small business but are put off by extortionate fees charged by marketing agencies or not sure where to start? We promise you that all the skills and techniques you need are learnable. At Yuno, we give you agency level knowledge with ongoing support for a fraction of the cost with our Hub Yuno platform. Our online courses and webinars teach you the online marketing skills you need to grow your business. The bite-sized mobile-friendly video lessons fit in with your busy work schedule. The webinars provide our community with ongoing support to make continued marginal gains, test out new ideas and stay ahead. Try it for free with 2 courses and a selection of webinars. Just click sign up for free, search Hub Yuno, or click the link in the description if you are watching on YouTube. Hello Chris, how are you doing? How was your bank holiday weekend?
Not particularly interesting, I must confess. I did a fair amount of business networking last week, so I was sort of doing my follow-ups and tried to keep things in order because I knew I had a fairly busy week this week. So I can't say it was of earth-shattering interest. Several of my contacts have said, "Oh, can we have a meeting on Monday?" Because in all this mess, everybody's kind of forgotten that bank holiday still really exists. So yeah, not that interesting, really.
Yeah, I think all fun has kind of been taken out of 2020, including a bank holiday. So in these interviews, how we usually start is just for you to give kind of a brief, I guess, elevator pitch of your life, really, to start at whatever point you want and to finish at whatever point you want.
Even though I had a little bit of warning that this question might be coming, it's still an incredibly difficult question to answer. So let me start with, hi, my name is Chris J. I'm 35 years old, and as you can see, I'm a wheelchair user. Now, that might not seem particularly earth-shattering in and of itself, but really, the story of my life and business does, to one degree or another, revolve around me being a wheelchair user. So I was born 10 weeks early with cerebral palsy. So I've had limited mobility most of my life. For anybody who doesn't know, cerebral palsy is just a complex name for brain damage. And throughout my life, I've had various experiences, both at school and later in the business world or in social interactions where I felt that actually I wish people had handled their communications with me differently. So to cut a long story short, I went through school, got good GCSEs, got good A-levels, went to university, did an undergraduate degree in politics, a master's degree in global security. And whilst doing my master's, a very good friend of mine contacted me to say that he was doing some volunteering with a charity where they were going into schools and talking to kids about what it was like to have a disability. And that is kind of where my journey started. So through working with that charity, doing a lot of training with kids, and then developing training with adults to go from that, when the charity shut down a couple of years ago owing to financial difficulties, that's kind of where Bascule Disability Training, my current business, kind of started, was a desire to see that work carrying on.
Okay, Chris, so going back to your school life, can you just give us a little bit of an insight into how it was being in school, in state school, with a disability?
Well, it's funny, looking back, I suppose some of the markers that led me to where I am now can be found in my school life. So cast your mind back 30 years, back in 1990, I'm also governor director of an independent school based in Chichester called Great Ballard. At the time, it was the only school in the area that was prepared to accept a child with a physical disability like mine. The local state schools didn't feel that they could cope with my physical needs. And I only had physical disabilities. I didn't have any learning difficulties. So immediately looking back, you start to see some of the initial problems in the system. But I was the only child with a disability at Great Ballard. So rather than being given a label, I was just freely me, and I was just different. And I had a great time. And of course, I was walking back then. When I went on to secondary school, I went to a secondary school with a special support unit attached to it. And bullying isn't a word I would like to use, but what I would say was rampant was that there were rampant misunderstandings between groups. I've mentioned many times before how I don't feel that most of the time prejudice is a massive problem for people with disabilities. It's ignorance in the truest sense of the word. People just don't understand. And time and again, in situations I saw at school, whether it was groups of people misunderstanding each other, being labelled as being of that strange place where other people don't talk about, there was a huge amount of misunderstanding. And that carried through even into my adult life, even at university. You know, I'd be out on a night out and I'd get asked the most awkward questions about, I think high up on my list was once being asked by a guy whether I could get it up, being asked all sorts of inappropriate questions about my life being touched inappropriately. People always love to come and massage my shoulders and do strange things. So I think a lot of that time, what I witnessed at school, looking back, and at university, was a level of misunderstanding that when I started volunteering with the charity, which we'll no doubt come on to in more detail, gave me a chance to do something about.
So that's obviously something that kind of wore on you from an early age. And it seems like you've gone on from university and kind of done things for yourself and really pushed it on. Where do you think that drive came from? Was it kind of always there? Were you always deciding like, okay, I quite fancy running something for myself or starting my own business? Was that drive always there, or do you think it sort of came from somewhere and developed?
Do you remember at school when they used to have these careers advisors come along, and the career advisor or the person from the business came along and said to you, I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do, and I just suddenly fell into what I've been spending the last 20 years of my life doing. As a pupil, you sat there thinking, that's rubbish, that's ridiculous, that's not possible. And that's exactly what happened to me. When I started volunteering with this charity and doing work with kids in schools, raising awareness of what people with disabilities can do, seeing the fact that I could bring a very unique perspective to children and helping them see disability in a totally different way, it was like a drug. Yeah, it was hugely, it was a hugely wonderful and heartwarming experience. And when I found that charity, I latched onto it and I started helping out more and more. And really, the rest is history. Unfortunately, the charity shut down a couple of years ago, really due to the school's funding crisis. We used to go in with teams of volunteers and talk to kids, obviously, and do a series of workshops, but we had to charge schools for that because getting people with disabilities places is very expensive. So I was hugely passionate about the work because I'd seen it, because I'd experienced it, and because I'd seen the benefit it could have. That when the charity closed, and I was the executive chairman of the charity at the time, I knew that the work couldn't stop. So that's really why Bascule was formed.
So the charity got into financial difficulties because, of austerity, and schools were kind of getting short of money. How did it change from forming the new charity? Did you come up against those same problems again, or did you have to change the business model?
I absolutely changed the business model. So whereas the charity was a charity, and that sounds slightly oxymoronic, Bascule Disability Training is a social enterprise whose primary business focus is on delivering training to large corporate businesses. And then 75% of the profit that's made from training businesses then goes to offer free workshops to school children. So I get the benefit of both kinds of work.
I was about to say social enterprise. I've interviewed someone who's very involved in social enterprise on the environmental side of things. If someone's watching this and they're not sure what, say, the difference between a enterprise, social enterprise, or a charity is, how would you define the difference? How would you define the line, say, between a charity and a social enterprise?
That's a really interesting question because I've struggled with it myself. As far as I can work out, a social enterprise really is a bit of a marketing term for any business structure that has a significant charitable bent, basically. So when you're setting up a social enterprise, and I'm a limited company, limited by guarantee, so there are no shareholders in my business, I can still set up with any kind of business structure that I want. I just have to make sure that I've got this significantly ethical, charitable side angle. Charities are a separate legal entity that have their own restrictions and requirements on them. So, for example, like a board of trustees and things like that. And the governance burden of charities, particularly after nearly I was involved in one for 10 years at various different levels. The governance burden is huge. Whereas the advantage of this is I've got a very small limited company, just me, but it has a significant ethical leaning.
Because I've seen kind of the rise in social enterprises and companies looking to expand their social enterprise side. Have you noticed that in the work you're doing? Have you noticed since you've kind of started the charity and moved into social enterprise, have you noticed more larger organizations kind of wanting to get involved with social enterprises?
Yes, I mean, there's this whole thing. I was talking at a leadership seminar about this the other day, about how there's a huge subset of young people who really want to work for ethical businesses. Because they want businesses that reflect their values. And I think we have to be a little bit careful. There's always been a lot around corporate social responsibility within large corporate businesses. And we want to be careful that we don't go too far into what we consider to be, fashionable. But certainly there are a lot more businesses who are functioning not purely on a profit basis. And I think these structures allow you to do slightly more interesting things. So, for example, I couldn't have the way Bascule currently runs as a charity because I then also need a board of trustees. It's very heavily restricted under a charity when one of the directors can also be paid to deliver services and things like that. So these new structures offer a degree of flexibility that allow you to help people but also make a living off it.
So going back to your story slightly, so coming out of university, and you said you got a job that you kind of didn't really enjoy or just kind of like fell into. What was your sort of thinking there? When was it that you kind of thought, this isn't really for me? Was it before you were doing the kind of charity work, or had the feelings going for a while?
No, I think there's probably a slight misconception there. I was being a lazy student, and that was when my friend contacted me and said, you should come and do some voluntary work. And that is how I fell in to the world of disability awareness. And almost immediately, it was a very small charity back then. I got a phone call on a Wednesday that said, come down and see what we're doing. On the Thursday, I came down to see. And on the Friday, they were short-staffed and I was presenting at a school with kids. So I literally fell into it. And for the next 10 years of my life, I was working with that charity in one form or another, and I absolutely loved it. The point I was trying to make is I did fall into it and I do love it. And when you tell so many young people, especially that you fall into something and that you stuck with it and you loved it, it doesn't make sense. How could you just fall into what you consider to be your vocation? But it does actually happen.
So yeah, that does happen. But I suppose at uni you could have easily said, no to those opportunities. And I think that some people sometimes turn away opportunities at whatever stage of life for whatever reason. Um, so, like in your head, was it just, oh, I'll give it a go and see what it's like, and if not, I'll kind of fall back in university, or was it just you literally turned up on day one and you thought this is it?
Almost love at first sight. It really was a bit like that because I'd had a summer job working for a large bank in London, which I absolutely hated. I absolutely hated it because I didn't feel any of the work I was doing was particularly valuable. It was an 8-week program. 1 week I spent on the equality and diversity team. And that was the one bit that kind of piqued my interest. Because here's what really appeals to me still to this day about the work that I do. On a daily basis, I take what a lot of people consider to be a negative, my disability, and I turn it into a positive because it's now a learning experience for other people. So I love the idea of taking a negative and just completely turning it on its head.
No, I think that is amazing. It's very obvious just speaking to you that your passion comes through. So, what do you feel the future holds for for yourself and your business?
Well, the biggest thing at the moment, because of course we can't not mention COVID-19 at the moment, given the time frame that these are filmed, is that what you're seeing is the first example of my new video conferencing setup. So I was very keen that when I deliver training out in the real world, and I'll go back to that stat of 67% of the British population feel uncomfortable again, the only way you break that barrier is by presenting a real disabled person with real disabilities to a group of people in person and working it like that. So for me, the most interesting thing, the most important thing, if I'm going to deliver training online, is for my whole self and my wheelchair, etc., to be seen. So this is the next big thing, disability awareness training online, because that's what it will take for my business to thrive in the current environment. Also, with the number of people returning from shielding and the fact that 40% of the population have either disabilities or long-term health conditions, I think businesses are going to need more help than ever before, in all honesty.
Yeah, well, COVID-19 has changed well, and that's an interesting point about it that you just made there. So, it sounds like, well, you are very passionate about what you do, and it's very obvious that kind of came across. Would you have any advice for someone who, is maybe kind of in their job and not really enjoying it, and maybe possibly thinking about trying something new? What kind of your advice be to them?
That's a good question. It's it's very difficult because I'm lucky enough to come from a reasonably financially secure background. So I could afford to take a little bit of a risk. And then I had enough qualifications that if what I decided to do didn't work out, I could then go back and do something else. So I'm conscious that whatever I say, there's that little bit of bias towards the financial cushion that I have that a lot of people don't have. But considering the percentage of your time that you spend in the workplace, do you really want to spend all of your time doing a job that you hate? And if you've got an idea and you've got a passion for it, you've got to have a passion for it. Because if you don't truly believe in what you do, if the prospect of getting up at 6 a.m. to go to a networking event turns you off, as it does me, that means you've got to have enough passion and belief in your business, a love for your business or the area that you're in order to make it work. So if you are going to take that step, you have got to love it with your heart and soul, because if you don't, you will never stick it out through the soul destroying times like COVID-19, recessions and things like that. My entire work basis has effectively been destroyed by the fact that I can't go in and do in-person delivery. Okay, that's what I live for. Okay, but I've understand the fact that that's not going to happen for a while. So I've pivoted. Like a lot of businesses, I've had to. And I've realized that with some creative thinking, I can still get 80 to 90% of what I want to do over on screen. Because actually, I like to think it's my enthusiasm and my personality that sells the disability thing. And I've always been about being authentic. So I'm a straight white male. I have no lived experience of any of the other protected characteristics, which is one of the reasons why I don't do bog standard equality and diversity training. Only disability can I deliver with any kind of authority and passion.
Well, that just sitting the other side of the screen, the authority and the passion certainly come through and come across. I mean, just on the slightly wider context, do you feel like in, say, the last 10, 15 years that kind of disability laws and the way companies handle disability, is that still moving in the right direction, or how close are we to kind of getting there from your experience, or what more is there to be done?
This is a very difficult question because I don't want to sound negative. What I would rather say to you is if we go back in time, 50 years to the 1970s, where people with disabilities were locked away, potentially in institutions, hardly ever or hardly always educated properly and not given opportunities, fast forward 50 years, there are no doubt that things are better. However, there is still an awful lot of work to do, but I would always rather focus on the future and about the positive things that we can introduce on change than dwelling on the past, I think is probably what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that your kind of passion for this, for the issues come across very nicely. And we usually end these with the kind of same question, which is, do you have kind of, what 3 pieces of advice would you have for people either just about to start in business or just about to start on their journey, or maybe that person we talked about a while ago who is thinking about a change? Are there kind of 3 bits of advice you'd have?
I think the 3 bits of advice I'd have, first and foremost, I'll go back to what I said, passion. You've got to have passion and love for what you want to do. Otherwise, you will never see it through. I think that's the first bit. Second bit is you can't do it on the back of a fag packet. You have to plan it. I think that's really important. And if my experience, thirdly, from the charity sector has taught me anything, is that you have to live authentically in the sense of you cannot have mission drift. So when I was part of that charity, there was a huge temptation to chase a pot of money and to contort our organization into something that it really wasn't. You know, we went over the years from doing disability awareness workshops to doing direct delivery for disabled children, which was a huge pivot in what we were doing. And actually, that came to bite us in the end because we were trying to do too many things at once. So my final bit of advice is decide what it is you're doing and do it well. And don't be tempted to expand from that unless you're really sure it fits in with what you're doing.
All right, perfect. It's been a really enjoyable chat, Chris. Been really, really interesting. And as I said, a couple of times, it's very obvious, your passion, enthusiasm certainly comes across. And I think even in this sort of, unfortunate video world that we've been pushed into, I can only see you being successful if it's anything like the interview we just had today. Is there anything finally you'd like to add to this?
No, I've just thank you for offering me this chance to talk about what I do, and to thank the audience for making it all the way to the end of my blabbering.
No, honestly, thanks a lot for your time. It's been really, really good to chat. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Absolute pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks.